Hey, y'all know what it is. Y'all know who it is, man. Welcome to another episode of I Got Five. Let's talk. We keep it fair like a California bear. Y'all know it's that time again to tell a friend, to tell a friend, to tell another friend, to share, like, and subscribe. Um, Today is another part of the war report. I just didn't label it that right now. But for those that'll be tapping in, make sure you share, like, subscribe. Uh, Today, it's a lot of things been going on, man, about this war, about this kidnapping. And a lot of people tend to look at Venezuela like they don't have a history. They tend to scrutinize Venezuela, But one thing that I've been hearing, this is the reason, it's because of the oil, it's because of this. But when you know the real history of Venezuela, it becomes something more. And I could say a lot of things about Venezuela, but this content that I'm gonna share today, it comes from the Cinematic History Tales, and it's entitled "How Venezuela Oil Money Built Modern Miami." Now, a lot of people don't understand this. Now, a lot of people do get the association that modern Miami is, drug infested. But when they want somebody of the darker race to look a certain type of way, they put these, how can I call it? They put these stigmas to the race of people. But at the same time this was going on, Venezuela had billionaires in Miami also. Now, could or was there some that dibbled and dabbed in drugs? That's a possibility, for sure. And some people might say, well, these other countries ain't built themselves up because America done did this, but they ain't strong like America to just get at people the way they want to. True. But that still becomes the policy of the American bullying system. There are things about Venezuela that people don't even really know. This is why Venezuela really has this problem with America. So I'm gonna run this content for y'all. Nah, I ain't gonna run it yet because I don't want nobody, but I'm gonna play it. But before I play it, drop your thoughts on how y'all feel about Venezuela. Before I play the real history of Venezuela, drop your thoughts on Venezuela. Don't be shy, get in the comments, man. Support the channel. And this assessment is my true assessment. It's how I really feel about the situations that's terrorizing and plaguing Venezuela. I'm not monetized, nor will I ever think I will be monetized. I've been doing this for years, and these are my honest assessments, my honest outlook on these things. Cause I'm fair. That's why I say we keep it fair like a California bear. I ain't a California raisin. I ain't gonna do no hate. I voted for Trump, and I'm the person that's here to tell you, I'm not gonna say I made the wrong decision, but I will say I took the lesser of two evils though. For sure I did. For sure. A lot of things people look at Venezuela nowadays. They look at Venezuela and they say, oh, it's a dirty country. It's foul. But I'm gonna play this content, and y'all know how we get amped up, man.
He didn't buy one pair, he said, get.
And disclaimer. This is for information and educational purposes only. This is an assessment of Venezuelan history dealing with oil and the modernization of Miami by way of cinematic history tales.
Through the streets of Miami, Florida in the middle of the 1970s, you would have noticed a strange phenomenon that puzzled the locals and delighted the shopkeepers. The finest jewelry stores, the luxury car dealerships, and the high-end electronic shops were not filled with American millionaires or Arab oil sheikhs or European aristocrats. They were filled with Venezuela.
At this time in the 70s, America ain't really had no millionaires like that. You gotta think. Coming off the war, Vietnam War, the Black Power era, there was millionaires in America, but they wasn't out. We don't see them, or it ain't documented about them being out. You know what I'm saying? Spending their wealth in their country.
They were everywhere. They were loud, they were happy, and they were incredibly rich. They moved in packs, families of 10 or 12, navigating the malls of Florida like conquering armies. They had a nickname among the merchants of the Sunshine State. They were called the Damedos. This translates simply to give me two. Because when a Venezuelan liked a pair of Italian shoes, he didn't buy one pair, he said, give me two. One for me and one for my friend. When he bought a color television, which was the marvel of the age, he said, give me two.
Money.
One for the living room and one for the bathroom. They paid him.
So as you see, these Venezuelans was coming through spending their chip. This ain't a part of their country. They had money. They helped fluctuate and create the Miami skyline by spending that money. They had millionaires way above America. And we talking about Venezuela. We not talking about Mexico. We not talking about Saudi Arabia, Panama. We talking about Venezuela in the 70s. Had millionaires that was coming through Miami and helped fluctuate the economy in America. Keep that in mind.
Cash. They carried suitcases full of U.S. dollars that were crisp and new-smelling of the bank vaults in Caracas. They bought condos in Brickell and mansions in Coral Gables without asking the price. They tipped waiters with $100 bills. To the average American struggling with the recession and inflation of the Carter years, these people seemed like visitors from another planet. A planet made of gold. Back in Caracas, the skyline was transformed.
A planet made of gold. America wasn't seeing this wealth in the 70s being spent like this. This is what Venezuelan nationals was doing in the 70s in Miami. They helped not only create wealth, but they showed how wealth is supposed to be spent.
Before the eyes of the world. It was a city of construction cranes and neon lights, a concrete jungle growing faster than any other city in the hemisphere. It was the only city in South America where the Concorde, the supersonic jet that catered to the global elite, landed regularly. You could fly from Paris to Caracas and
Venezuela was the America in the 70s. The supersonic jet. These niggas was above their time. This country was above its time. But they don't want to tell you that.
3 hours arriving in time for a champagne lunch at a French restaurant in Altamira that served lobster flown in that morning from Maine. The shops in the Sabana Grande district sold the latest fashions from Milan and Paris before they even arrived in New York or London. The whiskey consumption per capita in Venezuela was the highest in the world. They drank 18-year-old scotch like it was water. It was a party that seemed like it would never end. It was the era of Saudi Venezuela. To understand this moment of insanity, this fever dream of consumption and abundance, we have to understand the illusion. The world looked at Venezuela and saw a miracle. They saw a South American nation that had somehow cracked the code of development. It had a stable democracy where power changed hands peacefully every 5 years. It had a growing middle class that owned cars and homes. And above all, it had oil, rivers of oil, oceans of oil. But what looked like a miracle was actually a trap. It was a golden cage that was being built bar by the global financial system. And the people inside the cage were too drunk on cheap gasoline and expensive scotch to notice that the door was being locked. The story of the Saudi era begins not in Caracas, but thousands of miles away in the deserts of the Middle East. In October 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out. GPZ opens the door. Nations furious at Western support for Israel declared an oil embargo. They turned off the tap. The price of oil did not just rise, it exploded. It quadrupled overnight. It went from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel in the blink of an eye. It was the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. Money flowed like a tidal wave from the industrial economies of the United States and Europe into the coffers of the OPEC nations. Venezuela was a founding member of OPEC. In fact, the entire idea of OPEC, the organization, Venezuelan visionary named Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso. He was a brilliant but austere man who drove a small car and read by candlelight to save electricity. He had warned his countrymen years earlier that oil was the devil's excrement. He said it brings trouble, it brings waste, it brings corruption. He predicted that the sudden influx of unearned wealth would rot the soul of the nation. But in 1974, nobody was listening to the warnings of a grumpy old man. They were listening to the sound of cash registers ringing. The president of Venezuela at this moment was a man named Carlos Andres Perez, known to everyone as Cap. He was a charismatic, energetic populist who walked fast, talked faster, and wore loud plaid jackets. He took office in 1974, just as the tsunami of petrodollars hit the Venezuelan shore. He found himself in a situation that no leader in history had ever faced.
Where did that?
Registers ringing. The president of Venezuela at this moment was a man named Carlos Andres Perez, known to everyone as Cap. He was a charismatic, energetic populist who walked fast, talked faster, and wore loud plaid jackets. He took office in 1974, just as the tsunami of petrodollars hit the Venezuelan shore. He found himself in a situation that no leader in history had ever faced. He had too much money. The treasury was overflowing. The central bank literally did not have enough funds to store the international reserves. They had to stack sacks of dollars in the hallways of the Ministry of Finance. Carlos Andres Perez declared that Venezuela would use this money to become a first world nation within a decade. He coined the phrase, La Gran Venezuela, the Great Venezuela. His plan was audacious. He wanted to nationalize the oil industry, which was still run by American companies like Exxon and Shell. He wanted to build a massive steel industry in the jungle to rival Pittsburgh. He wanted to build the largest hydroelectric dam in the world. He wanted to give a scholarship to every student who wanted to study abroad.
And this was before Libya. This was before Muammar Gaddafi doing the same thing with his oil. Do you see here the same thing? Like, not only was they spending the wealth in America, making American businesses thrive, but they also wanted to help their own people. They wanted their own people to have something.
He wanted to turn Venezuela into a modern industrial power that would lead Latin America into the 21st century. And for a few years, it seemed to work. The government launched the Gran Mariscal de Ayacucho Scholarship Program. Tens of thousands of young Venezuelans were sent to the best universities in the United States and Europe completely free of charge. They were the children of mechanics and maids studying at Harvard and Oxford and the Sorbonne. It was a noble dream, a massive investment in human capital that was supposed to secure the future. But behind the dream, the economy was rotting. This is where the concept of the Dutch disease comes in. When a country gets a massive influx of foreign currency like dollars from oil, it makes the local currency very strong. The Venezuelan bolivar was pegged to the dollar at a rate of 4.30. It was solid as a rock. You could walk into any bank in Caracas with bolivars and walk out with dollars, no questions asked. But because the bolivar was so strong, it became incredibly cheap to import things from abroad and incredibly expensive to produce things at home. Why would a Venezuelan farmer grow corn when he could buy corn from Iowa for half the price? Why would a factory in Valencia make shoes when you could import designer shoes from Italy for pennies? The productive...
This is when the wealth, when you rely on wealth too much, instead of still relying on what you produce, you spend money. Instead of having farmers still grow corn, buy all the corn, and still import what you would need, this money made the people lazy. Like he said, why would I grow corn when I could import corn from another country for half the price? And again, this is what helped the American economy in the 70s. Like this, people wasn't, let's say, going to Saudi Arabia. America was making a name for itself during this time beyond all the civil conflict it had. The international relation and trade relation that America had with Venezuela was one that was making Venezuela prosperous, at the same time making America prosperous, but America couldn't be that prosperous because it didn't have that oil.
Apparatus of the country began to die. Agriculture collapsed. The fields were abandoned. The farmers moved to the cities to live in the shanty towns and live off the government handouts. Venezuela stopped making things and started buying things. They imported everything. They imported eggs. They imported clothes. They imported cars. They even imported the sand to build the concrete skyscrapers.
Again, why? Like, this is the problem that America has. America got to a position to where they have got so fat on the wealth that why would I buy something here, or why would I grow something here when I can just have somebody in Mexico or China do it and send it to me? And then now when we have a president like Trump that I voted for that does some fucked up shit, knowing that we rely on these trade goods or these certain things, and he puts tariffs on them, it also becomes our fault because we didn't rely on our own economy. We didn't rely on our own productability. We didn't rely on our own sovereignty. We looked to be built by somebody else. And when you look for somebody else to build you, they are the ones that actually owns your production.
Because apparently Venezuelan sand wasn't good enough. This was the first part of the trap, of the addiction to imports. But the second part was far more dangerous. It was the debt. You might ask why a country that was swimming in cash needed to borrow money. This is the great paradox of the 1970s. The oil money that flooded into Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and Iran had to go somewhere. These countries could not spend it all fast enough, so they deposited it in the safest place they knew, the banks of Wall Street and London. Citibank, Chase, Manhattan Bank of America. These banks were suddenly sitting on mountains of cash deposited by the oil nations. They had a problem. A bank does not make money by holding cash. It makes money by lending cash.
So if a bank makes money by lending cash and you have a country that's dumping cash into your lap, how the banks operate, the bank is going to get rich. Another greedy move. Because we know you can't go put $50 million in the bank today and then be like, tomorrow wake up and say, I want that 50 million now. Nah, because before you wake up in the morning, that month, that 50 million done already been lent out.
They had to find someone to borrow these billions of dollars.
Gross, dude. Why are these guys
The U.S. economy was in a deep recession. American businesses were stagnating. They were not borrowing. So the bankers looked south. They looked at Latin America, and specifically they looked at Venezuela. They saw a country with a stable democratic government and the largest oil.
Again, this is a country that helped bail America out. They helped. Hold on.
Oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere. They saw the perfect borrower. Bankers in expensive suits flew from New York to Caracas on the Concord. They stayed in the Tamanaco Hotel drinking scotch and meeting with government ministers. They carried briefcases full of loan agreements. They didn't wait for the Venezuelan government to ask for money. They begged the Venezuelan government to take it. They sold the government a fantasy. They said, look, oil prices are going to go up forever. Today oil is $12 a barrel. Tomorrow it will be 20, then 50, then 100. If you borrow $1 billion today, the inflation and the rising oil prices will make the debt disappear. It is free money. It is leverage. The Venezuelan government, led by Carlos Andrés Perez, fell for the pitch, hook, line, and sinker. They started borrowing frantically. They borrowed to pay for the massive infrastructure projects that were running over budget. They borrowed to subsidize the imports so that people could keep buying cheap whiskey and televisions. They borrowed to cover the corruption that was draining the treasury. The corruption was monumental. When there is that much money flowing through a system without checks and balances, it sticks to people's hands. Government contracts were awarded to friends of the party. Ghost companies were set up to receive loans that were never repaid. A commission was charged on every barrel of oil sold and every ton of steel bought. The era of the 12 apostles began referring to the 12 business tycoons who became billionaires simply by being close to the president. They built palaces in Caracas and bought islands in the Caribbean. But the most insidious part of the borrowing was the terms of the loans. The bankers were smart. They knew that the good times might not last forever, so they wrote the loan contracts with floating interest rates. This meant that the interest rate Venezuela paid was not fixed. It was tied to the U.S. prime rate or the London interbank rate. If the interest rates in the U.S. went up, the payments Venezuela had to make would go up too. Nobody in Caracas paid attention to this detail. In the mid-70s, U.S. interest rates were low. Money was cheap. The party continued. The government built the Guri Dam, one of the engineering marvels of the world, which provided electricity to the whole country. They built the Caracas Metro, a gleaming subway system that was cleaner and more modern than the New York subway. They built a sprawling industrial complex of Ciudad Guayana in the middle of the jungle. They nationalized the oil industry in 1976, creating PDVSA, the state oil company. On that day, they raised the Venezuelan flag over the oil wells and declared economic independence. But it was a hollow independence. By the end of the 70s, Venezuela had the highest per capita debt in the world. They owed billions to the very same banks that held their oil deposits. They were recycling their own money, paying interest to access their own wealth. It was a shell game of global proportions. The society began to change. The culture of hard work and thrift that had characterized the older generation of Venezuelans evaporated. It was replaced by the culture of easy money. If you needed a job, you didn't look to the private sector, you joined the government. The bureaucracy swelled to monstrous proportions. There were elevator operators for elevators that were automatic. There were gardeners for gardens that didn't exist. There were consultants who never consulted. Everyone was on the payroll. The state became the father, the mother, and the employer of the nation. And the illusion of wealth mapped.
Now, where do we see that at? Where do we see that at now? The same thing that happened in Venezuela Same thing happening in America right now. They have got so far into having wealth, they stop relying on self. And that's the fault of the leaders of the country. Because instead of investing it into the establishment of a country, paving roads, building schools, and things like that, it be other politics. And you see, once Venezuela started saying they wanted to do these things, what happened?
The deep inequality. While the middle class flew to Miami, the poor in the ranchos, the slums on the hillsides watched the skyline rise but saw little of the benefit. They got subsidies, yes. Gasoline was cheaper than water. You could fill the tank of a massive American gas guzzler for the price of a stick of gum. Bread was artificially cheap, but their schools were crumbling and their hospitals were failing. The money was being spent on concrete and imports, not on human capital. The gap between the Venezuela of the country clubs and the Venezuela of the barrios grew wider every day. As the decade of the 70s came to a close, the warning signs were flashing red. The oil market was becoming saturated. New oil fields in the North Sea and Alaska were coming online, breaking the OPEC monopoly. The demand for oil was dropping as Western countries became more energy.
And that's another thing. I don't know if a lot of y'all even checked it out, is that Venezuela is one of the countries that started the OPEC. You know, one of the countries that helped formalize OPEC. Once they formalized it, that's kind of when it all went down. When they opened to the outsider people. When they disclosed that they have more oil than Saudi Arabia, that was way more friendlier with America than Venezuela at the time. You gotta think, it's the 70s. Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini, you know what I'm saying? Who else?
Look at the jacket.
Was it So America needed a presence in the Middle East.
Of course you do.
They needed a presence. They already had the Western Hemisphere on lock. They saw what Venezuela could do with their wealth, with their resources, and started to lock them out. And once they locked them out, things started going up disarray.
Efficient. The price of oil stopped rising. It began to wobble. In 1979, a new president, Luis Herrera Campins, took office. In his inaugural address, he looked at the finances of the nation and uttered a phrase that should have terrified everyone. He said, "I'm inheriting a mortgaged country." He saw the books. He saw the debt. He saw that the spending was unsustainable. He saw that for every dollar that came in, $2 were going out, but he could not stop the machine. The momentum of the spending was too great. The political cost of austerity was too high. The people were addicted to the subsidies. The Dame Does mentality was ingrained in the national psyche. People believed that being rich was their natural state. So instead of cutting back, the government doubled down. They borrowed more money to pay the interest on the old loans. They played a...
So, also you have to blame the people for wanting to be that. And that's where the government comes in at, because there's certain things that you do, you know, you try to make everybody rich and give them some type of money from the natural resources. But sometimes giving a person too much money is crippling them. Sometimes, and it's not even sometimes, look what, instead of America reversing it and helping them come up with a new plan, they allowed it to go the way it was going, and then turned their back and went somewhere else. In my opinion, allowing Venezuela to fail they wanted that power, that richness that Venezuela had, but they didn't want to share it. No, you didn't. And that's just the truth.
Game of musical chairs, hoping the music would never stop. But the music was about to stop. In Washington, D.C., a man named Paul Volcker was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was a giant of a man with a cigar and a mission. His mission was to kill inflation in the United States. To do that, he was about to do something that would destroy the Venezuelan dream. He was about to raise interest rates to levels never seen before. As we end the first part of this story, Venezuela is standing at the precipice. It is 1979. The nightclubs in Caracas are full. The highways are jammed with American cars. The government is spending money as if there is no tomorrow. The banks in New York are counting their profits. But the trap has been set. The floating interest rates are a ticking time bomb. The oil price is softening. And the country that thinks it is richer than the USA is about to find out that it is actually a debtor living on borrowed time. In the second part of this story, we will see the crash. We will see the day the money ran out. We will see the infamous Black Friday and the social explosion that followed, proving that the Saudi era was nothing but a shimmering mirage in the desert. The year is 1981 and the trap is about to snap shut. In the United States, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, makes a decision that will shake the foundations of the global...
You always wondered why that app...
To fight the runaway inflation of the dollar, which was eating away at the American economy, he raises interest rates to 20%. It is a shock therapy for the American economy, painful but necessary. But for Venezuela, it is a death sentence. Remember the fine print in those loan contracts, the floating interest rates. Overnight, the interest payments on Venezuela's massive foreign debt doubled and then tripled. The country had borrowed billions when money cost 5%. Now they had to service that debt at 20%. At the exact same time, the oil market collapsed. The glut of oil in the world drove prices down. The perfect storm had arrived. Expenses were skyrocketing while income was plummeting. The vice was tightening. For a few years, the government tried to hide the reality. They burned through their reserves, trying to prop up the currency. They kept the bolivar pegged at $4.30 to the dollar. They wanted to maintain the illusion of the Saudi Venezuela. They wanted the middle class to keep flying to Miami. They wanted the Scotch to keep flowing. But you cannot fight mathematics. The central bank was bleeding dollars. Every day, millions of dollars left the country as nervous investors and wealthy Venezuelans moved their money to accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. It was capital flight on an industrial scale. The people who had benefited most from the boom, so-called apostles of development, were the first to abandon the ship.